Mental health and mental disorders continue to be an enigma to the human race, and psychology as a whole has unfortunately been infected with misinformation and pop culture aesthetics, not only by everyday citizens like you and me, but even by licensed professionals themselves. From people pretending to have mental disorders because they think it's some cute, quirky personality trait, to a literal licensed psychologist diagnosing a random person they just met over a Zoom call with ADHD and giving them ADHD medication simply because he claimed that he can't focus or has trouble sitting still. I am not joking. It is that easy to get diagnosed with a mental disorder and given medication.
I'm having some concerns regarding ADHD. What symptoms do you have?
Like extreme, like inability to focus a lot of the time. Like I can't like sit still or like not fidget.
We do screen positive for symptoms consistent with ADHD. So typically the treatment for ADHD is stimulant therapy. Start with an extended release Adderall.
Sometimes mental health and illnesses seem to be taken like a joke to many, but as nonsensical and despicable some practices seem today, it is nothing close to what mental illness care used to be in America. Centuries ago, we didn't even recognize it as a real thing, and the treatments for it was questionable. So to fully understand the foundations of our understanding of mental illnesses in America, we'd have to go back to America in the 1700s, where the very first psychiatric hospital or insane asylum was invented. The Virginia Williamsburg Asylum is particularly important in American history because it was the very first of its kind. And I don't mean the first hospital ever, that was the Pennsylvania Hospital, founded in 1751 in Philadelphia. I mean the very first mental hospital, or insane asylum as it was very frequently called in that time. It was first proposed by Virginia's Lieutenant Governor, Francis Fauquier. There are many reasons for the want to build a place for the mentally unstable, but for Fauquier, one of the biggest reasons was because of the rebellion of the Stamp Act. After the French and Indian War, which was costly, the government needed money to pay for the war. So what was the answer to that? What the answer always was and always will be: raise taxes. And so because of this rebellion and this unrest, Fauquier, who was very loyal to the king at the time, deemed everybody who rebelled as lunatics. At a speech that he gave that was originally speaking on the repealing of the Stamp Act, he suddenly changed course and just started talking about all of the people who rebelled against the act, and used them as examples of people who were mentally unsound and can't reason. He proposed to the House of Burgesses that a building should be made solely for the purpose of housing people who he claimed could be a danger to society due to their impairments. And 5 years after Fauquier's death, the building was finally completed. The building, that originally only had 24 cells, was rapidly growing into several different buildings and structures, housing over 300 patients. It became a very easy solution for anybody who seemed out of the ordinary. Not only people who had mental illnesses, but people who rebelled and caused trouble, people who didn't agree with the government and spoke out against it, women who acted strange or spoke out of turn. All of these types of people, regardless of them actually being mentally unwell or not, were admitted into these hospitals. And of course, the asylum got very quickly overcrowded. And with so many patients being admitted, for right or wrongful reasoning, you need people to care and look after them, which is where our main character finally makes an entrance to the story. Well, not yet. No, not yet. You probably can't read this, but I've already bought this stupid thing for this bit, so I'm gonna keep going with it. Also, just a quick note, for the remainder of this section of the video, I proceed to look off into the void. I don't know who I was looking at or why I was looking over there. I thought I was looking in the camera, but clearly I was not. So I promise you, I'm not trying to be disrespectful and avoid eye contact with you, I'm just stupid. Samuel Galt. He's a Scot-Irish immigrant who first moved to Williamsburg. So he started the bloodline here in Virginia, America. He worked as a goldsmith and the keeper of the public jail. Sammy Boy had two sons, James and John. James, who was the older of the two, was the very first Galt and just the very first person to be put in charge as a keeper at the Williamsburg Asylum. And his wife actually ended up becoming the matron. John, who was James's younger brother, also worked at the Williamsburg Asylum, but he was also a surgeon, a vestryman, and one of the board members of the William and Mary College. But it's safe to say he was a pretty accomplished person. So John Galt had a son named Alexander Dickey Galt, and it was his turn to assume the role of physician at the Williamsburg Asylum. Alex was the first to take a big jump in the treatment of patients, as in he wanted to change the monotonous and everyday regime of the hospital. He allowed some of the patients to engage in some outdoor tasks, and even allowed some of them to work on his farm. He then resigned his role in 1836. Also, he married his cousin. Not particularly important information, just thought I'd share. And finally, Alexander was succeeded by his son and our main character of the story, John Minson Galt, the sequel. John Galt II is one of the most prominent people in the functioning of the Williamsburg Asylum. He was quite the scholar and very passionate about academics. He loved to read, he loved books, and he loved studying plenty of different methods of treatment from all across the world. He could fluently speak over 5 languages. He graduated from the William and Mary, one of the best public universities in the nation and also now used for research. We'll get more on that later. And then he traveled to Philadelphia to go to the Medical College of the University of Pennsylvania, where the first medical hospital was born. He was even one of the 13 founders of what today we call the APA. So Galt was very well versed in his field of study. He was then assigned to be a superintendent at the hospital in 1841, which he was not so thrilled about. It seemed like a very demanding role to him, but of course, because of his entire bloodline of everyone working there, he kind of felt obligated to. But even though he wasn't thrilled about working there, he took it very seriously and took so much time into fulfilling his role as the superintendent, and was very passionate about trying to make the patients' lives there as best as he could give it to them. The main thing that sets John apart from his ancestors and all of the other superintendents and physicians that worked there at the hospital was his unique, or in today's terms we would simply call humane, way of doing things. Galt II was one of the very few doctors who was actually trying to better his understanding of mental illnesses and the insane. As I said before, he was an avid scholar, and he was always looking to other states and even other countries to see the way that they treated their patients who were mentally ill. And after traveling and gaining different perspectives, he very eagerly wanted to implement these strategies into the Williamsburg Asylum. For example, like those who lived in Geel in Belgium. The insane there were allowed to live in villages and farms with sane families, rather than being cooped up in what really seems like a cell all day. Or the inspiration he drew from South France. Remember the William and Mary I was talking about earlier, and how on top of being a prestigious college, they're also a massive research institution? Well, I was able to find some of the archives of the school, and they had so many resources on Galt because he'd went there before. But unfortunately, I did not have access to it, so I was able to get in contact with some of the people who worked there at the institution in hopes that they would send me some archive documents about Galt, and this lady named Susan came in clutch. She gave me mounds of information, book readings on Galt, and even several letters and personal diary entries of Galt and other people that I unfortunately can't read. But anyways, shout out to Susan at the William and Mary. Susan, you know who you are. Anyway, she sent me a book written by Galt himself called The Treatment of Insanity, published in 1846. And he wrote a few sections dedicated to the findings of treatment in different countries, one of them being South France. He speaks of remedies like taking warm baths for a long time, or mixtures of oil and honey to calm patients. Very gentle and less harsh forms of treatment, very different from what they were doing at the time. So after all this amazing research, he tried to present these new ideas to his fellow physician peers. And you can probably guess how that went for him. Okay, physician meeting, you guys. We need to figure out what we're gonna do to help the health of our patients. It's getting overcrowded and we're still not discharging any of our patients regardless of our treatments. So you mean slitting people's wrists and letting them bleed for hours and chaining them to a wall and putting a muzzle over their mouth isn't helping their mental health? What a surprise. Who are you looking at? I'm over here. But yes, that's what I'm saying. It's not working and I don't know why, but we need to come up with new ideas. Have we tried injecting them with malaria-infested blood? That gives them fevers. It calms them down, right? We tried that. They died. Okay, did we try lobotomies to change their behavior? We tried that. They died. Oh, what about purgatives? Purgatives calm them down, right? Have we been using those? We tried that. Let me guess, they died? No, they had explosive diarrhea. Will someone give me an idea that won't have the place smelling like a pigsty? Maybe we should get the exorcist involved. Guys.
Oh yeah, that'll definitely work.
Why don't we try using less harsh methods and instead look at this in an empathetic and thoughtful way. I've been doing research and traveling to Europe to see how they treat their patients. Maybe we should try things like building libraries and gardens for them to enjoy. Maybe we can let them go outside for a little bit and interact with other people in the communities. These are more than just insane patients. These are people. People just like us who just need a little bit of help. And that's our job as physicians. We're here to help them. Oh, that was amazing, Dr. Galt. Just beautiful. Beautiful. You have such a way with words. Thank you. Thank you so much. So you guys are gonna help me make reports to the hospital, right? No. Absolutely not. No.
Nah. Yo, my dude's
No.
tripping.
Mm-mm.
It's gotta
Nah.
be the opium he be snorting. Oh God, bro.
Nope.
What are you talking about? Let them
No.
decide. For
No.
real.
Yo, he wilding right now. Yeah, so it didn't go very well. But despite the protests and the bombastic side eyes he was probably getting from his colleagues, he really did try his best to make changes in the facility. He opened up luxuries like sewing rooms and libraries to pass the time for patients. He no longer wanted to use restraints, and I think one year he even went a whole year without having to use them at all. He wanted to reduce the use of harsh drugs and start moving on to more soothing things, and he even allowed the admission of Black patients and the use of Black staff in the hospital in the South during the Civil War. So this was kind of a big deal. But what really ruffled the feathers of all the other physicians around, their very last straw, was Galt's proposal to allow the patients to live amongst the townspeople and allow them to have some freedoms outside of the asylum, and even possibly let them live with mentally sane families, let them live and work on farms, the same way they did that in Gil, just so they aren't demonized from society and treated like prisoners. But that's kind of what everyone wanted in the first place. The whole purpose of Fakir suggesting a mental hospital was not truly to help them, but was more to separate them from the rest of society so they don't invoke fear in the normal citizens. The original idea for the mental hospital was never truly supposed to be a hospital. It was always meant to be a prison. So of course, hearing someone completely shatter this way of thinking and going completely against the norm was basically digging your own grave. And after that, a lot of people completely despised Galt and his ideals, and he became very isolated in the medical and psychology world, even though he was right. Unfortunately, it would all go downhill from this point forward. Years later, General McClellan's Union soldiers have trekked their way to Virginia, taking over the city of Norfolk and making their way to Williamsburg. On May 5th, 1862, the Union soldiers took siege of the asylum and did not allow Galt or any of the other physicians inside of the facility. So Galt had no other choice but to reluctantly make his way back to his home on the hospital grounds and wait. It's been said that he was so anxious about the asylum and his patients that he couldn't eat or sleep for several nights, and eventually that would be the death of him, because almost 2 weeks later, Galt was found dead at the young age of 43. There were high levels of laudanum, a very strong opiate, and one that Galt has become quite dependent on in his late stages of life, found in his body. To this day, it is still unknown to whether or not the overdose was simply accidental and he just took too much to calm him down, or if the overdose was intentional and the effect of the war on the hospital and his mental health was just too much to bear. Although I definitely don't think that would have been the only reason, and it's not hard to understand why he would try to end his life if he actually did. Of course, taking over the asylum would have been the last straw, but everything that happened before that, building up to this moment. He studied for years so his patients could be better, passionately educated himself on the mentally ill in other countries, and all of his ideas were shunned, demonized, and just flat out ignored. He had no real supporters except for his family, but it's hard to focus on that positivity when the people who really need to be listening to him, his colleagues and his peers and the other physicians at the hospital, won't even hear him out. And instead, they isolated him because of his different viewpoints. He was simply overwhelmed. He was shut out in the one world he felt he really belonged in. It's said that towards the later years of his life, somewhere in his diary, he wrote, "Men walk in shadows and darkness, whilst an inexorable abyss lies yawning at their feet." None of Alexander's children married or had any children of their own, so unfortunately the family bloodline did stop after his daughter Sarah Maria had died. Today, insane asylums, or what we would call today psychiatric hospitals, don't really exist anymore in America, and there is some political debate on whether or not we should open them again. This often comes up when speaking about the vast population of the homeless, people who have nowhere to go and no one to run to, and a lot of them suffering from mental illnesses. And unfortunately, they don't receive help, and people see them as nothing but a nuisance. But that's another conversation for another day. Overall, Galt's ideals of ethics and morals did not go to vain, because slowly but surely, people started to realize that, hey, maybe treating your patients like trash isn't helping their mental state. And therapy, psychiatry, and just mental health in general in America is now being recognized as an actual issue and is being treated in both objective and empathetic ways. And while we're still working out the kinks and there's still some questionable things that are going on, I can assure you it is a far cry from what they used to do back in the 1700s when mental health was practically not a thing.